So welcome everyone to the 2026 Vermont Vegetable and Berry Growers Winter Webinar Series. It's feeling more like spring out there, but we're still going every Wednesday at lunchtime right through the end of April, and always grateful for wonderful and willing presenters, especially farmers taking time out of their busy days to be here with us. So thank you all. Today we're going to dig into high tunnel disease issues, starting out with Ann Hazelrigg from the UVM Plant Diagnostic Clinic. It's going to give as always, excellent overview of plant diseases. Thank you, Anne. And then Andy Jones from Intervale Community Farm and Christa Alexander from Jericho Settlers Farm. So if you can keep yourself muted, put questions in the chat, and we'll have time for question and answer at the end of the presentations.
Okay, great. We're going to jump right into it. Thanks for attending. I'm just going to give an overview, and then the people that really know what they're talking about are going to follow up. So what's that spot? Well, there's a lot of weird spots that show up in high tunnels. And one of the first one can be cold damage. So I've seen sometimes they look like leaf spots. So just be aware that cold damage is one of the first things you might see in the high tunnel. The damage will usually be on one edge of tissue. And you should always look at the roots, make sure they're healthy and white, but the new growth should grow out just fine. And that's the first spot of the year. Another thing that can look like a leaf spot, and I get this from new growers a lot, is magnesium deficiency. Starts on the lower older leaves, and you see that intervale chlorosis. But that picture on the right, I mean, that can look like a leaf spot too. So just be aware that sometimes you get that brown intervale. The yellow turns to brown, and it can look like a leaf spot disease. So the leaf spot diseases we typically don't see in a high tunnel are the alternaria and septoria leaf spots, the fungal leaf spots that are common in field tomatoes, but we don't see it so much in a tunnel because we don't have that 6 to 8 hours of leaf wetness. But the places I have seen it in a tunnel, on the outer rows, when rain comes in, you may see some early blight and septoria leaf spot, but it's pretty rare in a high tunnel. And unless you use overhead irrigation, you probably won't ever see it, which is great. So we're sort of, what we do see are all those leaf spots and diseases that like high humidity, that don't necessarily need that leaf wetness. They just need humidity over about 85%. And the most common one is leaf mold. Looks like yellow patches on the upper sides of the leaves. And then if you turn it upside down, you see that brown, fuzzy, all the spores of the disease. This one likes high humidity, has a wide temperature range. The good thing is the fruit isn't affected, but it can cause yield loss due to all those leaf infections. Starts low in the plant, works its way up. It can overwinter for a year on diseased tissue or in sclerotia for several years, which I just learned. I didn't know it had a sclerotia, which is a long-term overwintering structure. So that's just a reason you want to clean up your houses when you're done. The most important thing is get that humidity down. Anything you can do to get it below that 85%, which isn't always possible if it's 100% humidity outside and raining, but venting, fans, plant spacing, trellising, you can prune those lower leaves up to the first cluster. And then you can, resistant cultivars are out there to leaf mold. So choosing the right cultivar to avoid the disease. Fungicides can work, but they're not very effective if you don't control the humidity. You're just wasting money and time and effort. There are resistant cultivars. These are some that were listed in some New Hampshire trials: Geronimo, Imperial 643, Masada, Panzer, and Rebelski. So that's another option. There are fungicides, Champ, and several other OMRI approved. But again, if you can't get that humidity lower, below 85%, I think you're wasting time and money. Powdery mildew is the other main disease that we see in high tunnels. Again, it doesn't like that leaf wetness. It likes warm, dry conditions and high humidity. And so It's easy to diagnose. You see those white fuzzy patches, usually on the upper side of the leaf. It can also be on cucumbers. That's on the underside of the leaf. But, under really severe conditions, it can basically defoliate, kill the plants. It doesn't infect the fruit, but, you can have enough leaf loss that it will affect yield. So powdery mildew only lives on live tissue. So if you had it last year, but didn't keep any plants over the winter, you won't have it in the spring on the seedlings you produce. But if you purchase seedlings, you want to carefully inspect so you don't introduce it early. And that's what happened a few years ago. A lot of growers got in transplants from California or somewhere, and they were already infected with powdery mildew. And it's really tough. You're fighting a losing battle if it shows up that early in the season. And I think a lot of growers had trouble trying to beat down the disease. Scouting is really important for this disease. The earlier you catch it, the easier it is to manage. Powdery mildews are all very host specific. So the powdery mildew that's on tomato is not the same powdery mildew as the cucurbit one or the lilac one or the phlox one. They're all very host specific, but they all kind of show up at the same time because they all like those same high humidity, warm conditions. There is a fungicide program for powdery mildew, and this is taken from Meg McGrath's website. Her recommendations were if powdery mildew is present early in the season, like during the vegetative phase, start with sulfur because it's the most effective. If the fruit is present, sulfur can leave residue, so you want to switch to a biopesticide like double nickel for 2 weeks. And then through the harvest period, you can apply a mineral oil like JMS stylet oil because they don't leave a residue. There is a break needed, 14 days, she suggested, between sulfur and oil applications, because if there's a sulfur residue on the leaves when oil's applied, it can cause sulfur to be moved into the leaves, ending up with some phytotoxicity. She said instead of the JMS stylet oil, you could also use Millstop or Armacarp. Late blight, that can always show up in high tunnels. It has got that big quarter-sized leaf spot on the leaves. And this one shows up usually higher in the plant because the spores blow in and then get rained out, or in the field at least, and then rained out on those upper leaves. But if the pressure is really high in the area, and Vern does a good job letting everybody know when it's around, high tunnels are not immune for sure. And we really haven't seen this the past few years, although one grower who may talk about it did see it late in the season. So we've lucked out the last few years on that one. So keep up with Vern's newsletter to make sure you know if it's in the area or if it's going to come or what the weather is that might bring the disease in. And if you're not going to bother spraying, it's best just to destroy the crop. And copper works pretty well, but you really have to keep up with it. The other leaf spot we saw in a high tunnel, this one was such a puzzler to me, and Christa and Andy might talk about it too, was a leaf spot in high tunnel cucumbers. And I don't know how many samples I took of this thing. I thought for sure it was going to be a fungal leaf spot. I could never get anything out of there. And then I also sent samples to Maine because I thought, oh, maybe I'm just not good at this. So they couldn't find anything either. But it may be due to phosphorus, due to high pH, but I'm going to let Christa talk more about that. But I think we asked the question at the recent high tunnel conference, who else has seen this in their houses? And I think a lot of people have seen this. But it really can be kind of devastating. It looks awful. I'm not sure if yield was really affected, but somebody else will talk about that, I'm sure. The other leaf spot that we might be seeing this time of year is on spinach, and it's cladosporium. It's a fungal leaf spot. It likes cool, moist conditions and higher humidity, but it can grow in a wide range. It can live on dead spinach tissue for up to 8 years. And the way to manage it, it's just basically temperature and moisture management. Um, it's really important never to put row covers on wet plants because that can really cause this disease to take off. It can be seed-borne, so you want to make sure you bleach or hot water treat your seed, rotate, good spacing, all those things to lower humidity and leaf wetness will help. Remove infected tissue. And there are a couple organic fungicides you can use. The Lifeguard is one of them. And they found that there are more resistant cultivars. There are some resistant cultivars. Winter Bloomsdale is more resistant than Ozarka or Field Green. So that's one that's you might be seeing soon. We usually see it in the spring and the fall, not in midsummer. This is one I got from a grower just just last week, I think. Just pulled the row covers off his spinach, and he was saying, "Oh my gosh, what disease is this?" But to me, it looks abiotic. To me, it doesn't look like a disease. It looks to me like it's either cold injury, water, nutrients. My recommendation was make sure you check the undersides of the leaves, make sure there are no spores that could be downy mildew under there. Look at the root systems, make sure those are good. But I suspect that these plants will grow out of it. And he was going to do some harvesting today. And so he was going to check all those things out. But the new growth to me looks good. And it looks like it's pretty much all on older tissue. But he's going to report back. So the one other disease that's a big problem in spinach high tunnels is downy mildew. And this is one that can cause that yellowing on the upper side of the leaf, but you need to look at the underside. And if you see those dirty brown purpley spores, that's downy mildew. And there are several different races of this fungal like pathogen. In Northeast, we've been seeing 12, 13, 14. Most cases were race 14. But we've also seen 15, 16, 17, and a novel race. But I think now there are 19 different races. And so while all the breeders are trying to breed resistant spinach to this, the pathogen is doing the best to breed too. So resistant cultivars, get the cultivar that has the most resistant to all those different races. Grow more than one variety, hedge your bets. Once they're infected, there's really no rescue. Chill it under, rotate out, but it's all, try to manage relative humidity and leaf wetness, avoid covering wet leaves. There are some preventatives you can use, lots of organic options. But yeah, it's a tough one to rescue for sure. Okay, so what if your plant doesn't have a leaf spot, but it's wilting? Always look lower in the plant. That's the first thing. If the whole crop is wilting, then I would suspect maybe a water issue. Make sure your emitters are working, your irrigation is working. But probably the early spring problem that we see, it's kind of a hit or miss problem, maybe where the emitters are putting out too much water, or it's a lower spot in the high tunnel, is root and crown rot. The picture on the right of the tomato, it almost looks like mice have been in there chewing away that outer bark or whatever it's called. But yeah, pull it up, get it out of there. Usually a hit or miss. It won't wipe out the whole house, and replant. The fungus is in all soils. It just likes the cool, wet conditions to infect. So I'd put something right back in there. The other thing that causes wilt is Sclerotinia white mold. That's usually an early season problem too. It's easy to diagnose. That's that fluffy white mold. And then embedded in the white mold, you'll see these black sclerotia, which is hardened mycelia. And you want to cut that plant off at the base, get it out of the house before those sclerotia drop into the soil. Again, this is a hit or miss one, usually in low spots of the tunnel. It's got a wide host range, but we typically see it on high tunnel tomatoes. But yeah, get it out of there. and replant. Doesn't wipe out a whole house. The other thing we see early in the season is tomato pith necrosis, and that it's caused by a bacteria. You'll see wilting. It occurs when the nights are really cool, there's high humidity, it's cloudy, but there's high vigor in the tomatoes, high nitrogen. And one of the first symptoms you see is a lot of adventitious roots. And then if you cut open the stems, you'll see that black, dark brown vascular browning. With time, this can recover. It doesn't always kill the plant. So, but this is typically an early season disease when things are growing, when there's a lot of nitrogen, but cool, cloudy weather. The other thing that we see is a root rot called corky root rot. And there's usually, if corky root rot's there, there's also another root disease called black dot root rot. They sort of occur together. They're in all high tunnel soils, especially if you've grown tomato after tomato after tomato. But luckily, most people graft resistant cultivars. So that's the best way to avoid it. I was out at Ohio State working on this disease with them last winter, and they have a real problem with it because a lot of the Amish growers, they don't typically graft tomatoes. So they're really trying to battle this root rot disease. So basically it causes those corky lesions on the root, the black dot, you can see the black fruiting bodies. But yeah, the way to avoid it is to use resistant rootstocks like Maxifort. But we did have a case where this Xinjiang rootstock was used, and it's listed as resistant to corky root rot and black dot, but that rootstock is on the right, and the other one, a different rootstock is on the left. So obviously, this one didn't hold up to the corky root rot disease. So just be aware. But I know Maxifort works well. Later in the season, if you see wilting in the plant, oftentimes you'll see a leaf scorching, leaf dieback. This is a bad one. It usually shows up when there's a heavy fruit load. And if you cut open the stem, you might see adventitious roots too, but you see that black or dark brown in the vascular system. So this would occur later in the season versus the pith necrosis early in the season. You want to get that out of the house. You don't want to touch any other tomatoes. It can really spread rapidly through a house and wipe out a whole house. So this is one you want to check with. It's really destructive. You can easily move it around by pruning and suckering, destroy the plants. Have one person, don't work in a greenhouse, then go to field tomatoes, get it tested. We have these rapid assay kits that if you send me a sample, I can test it right away. And basically it's seed-borne, so good seed treatment is very helpful. And on the fruit, you get those white raised dots if you've got bacterial canker in the house. Okay, that's it for me.
Thanks, Anne.
Yeah, and always, if you have a problem, you're always welcome to send pictures to me or send samples to the clinic. We're happy to help as much as we can.
That's a lot of amazing information. And yeah, Anne is always very, very quick and responsive, but I'm good and scared now. Thanks. I have a couple quick questions just before we jump over to Andy. Do you have recommendations on how you mentioned scouting incoming plants for powdery mildew? Are there like specific things to look for? Do you need a hand lens?
Well, it's tough. I mean, the main thing you're looking for probably is the powdery mildew, and those spores could be on the plants and you may not see symptoms. So, I mean, if you've got the luxury of putting all those transplants in a separate house, and letting them have warm, dry conditions, symptoms would develop. But that's the main thing you're looking for. But yeah, sometimes the spores can be on the plant and we don't see the symptoms. So it's impossible to know for sure.
Great, thank you.
Until AI can just scan them all, right? And then tell us.
I'll tell you, I can do all our farming for us.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Anne. I'm gonna jump over to Andy and yeah.
Thanks, Anne. Always great to have things to look forward to. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about a few of the things that we do at ICF, but a quick little business overview. We do about 20 acres of field vegetables, about a half an acre of tunnels. Those are 632 by 132, so about 4,000 square foot harnoise. We sell almost everything through vegetables, CSAs, summer and winter programs. So those are the markets. Tunnels are really critical for that. For both of our summer share and our winter share, the crops coming out of the tunnels are around a third of the total share value that we're giving people. So we really need those crops and we pay a lot of attention to them. They are some of the most favored crops for our members, and they really do help us give people what they want all year round. So 2023, 2024, we lost a lot, almost all of our field vegetables in 23 and probably 2/3 or 75% of them in 24 to the July floods. But because our tunnels were mostly spared, we were able to keep going with shares of tomatoes and cucumbers and some green things we tossed in there in the summer. And amazingly, it kept our summer people pretty happy to the point where they came back, even though we had had kind of a terrible season. So they're really key. So our major tunnel crops are tomatoes, cucumbers, and peppers in the summer. And in the winter, the things that we grow substantial amounts of are baby lettuce, spinach, and curly kale. We do a smattering of a bunch of other things, some herbs, some other baby greens, arugula, things like that in the winter. But these crops are really kind of the focus of most of what we do. All of our tunnels are unheated. That has some implications in terms of our ability to control humidity. So I think, and Ann talked about this, and I'm sure Christa's going to talk about it, but prevention is really our primary tunnel disease management strategy. It's true in the field, but it's even more true in the tunnels. And most of prevention is related to either different levels of genetic resistance and or humidity management, and in the broadest sense. So that's the end of my presentation. I'm not going to say anything else. Okay, so I'm going to go, let's see, I got to move us. All right. Spinach, starting with stuff that we have out in the tunnels right now. Spinach, we do a fair amount, probably a house and a half worth or so. This is one of our winter houses. This is a sort of not our current look on how we do spinach, but we still do about a little bit more than this. We do a mix of direct seeding and transplanting, starting in direct seeded stuff in late September and into October, some transplants in October, and then finishing up with some late direct seeded stuff in early November. And that's all based on when we're pulling those houses out of our summer crops, once we're flipping them over from being done with cucumbers and peppers and tomatoes, so we can get our winter crops in. Spinach these days, we're typically planting in the outer beds, which, because the houses are unheated, are significantly cooler than the interior beds. So we typically have, a couple to 3 beds of spinach in a house along those outer edges. And we don't use any row cover on the spinach. We can probably get away with that a little better than some places because we're pretty low in the Champlain Valley, so we have milder temperatures than a lot of the state. We did have some cold damage in some of those minus 10-degree nights this winter, but for the most part, things look pretty good even after a winter like this, and we just don't have too many winters like this. Our real disease issues in spinach are downy mildew, which Anne spoke a little bit about. For us, it's really a cool weather disease. It can happen anytime from kind of the later fall into the winter and into the early spring. For us, the genetic resistance is really the key thing, since organic sprays haven't really worked very well. And to get really good coverage and to keep them covered and to not have stuff that you necessarily want to eat on there, it's a lot easier to go with the genetic resistance. We have had outbreaks of both number 12, strain 12, and strain 14 to the point where we've lost an entire house of spinach. Those were really a result of not having good genetic resistance and having really bad humidity management, overhead watering, followed by row covering, followed by a period of time when we barely removed the row covers because it was cold and cloudy for so long. So don't do all those things together. And so we pay really close attention to when we're watering, making sure that we're watering when we can vent the house and flush out some of the humidity. The varieties that we're liking right now, Dallas, Colibri, Sun Angel, have wide downy mildew resistances, including 12 and 14, and there are others out there. Rotation doesn't make as big a difference for us with downy mildew because I think the downy mildews are obligate parasites and they need living host tissue. But the outdoor reservoirs are important. So we've been more careful in recent years to make sure that even if it's mid-November and it's a bummer to kind of till stuff in and have bare soil over the winter outside, we'll go ahead and do that to get rid of any downy mildew that might be in the field, so that we have a better chance of not bringing it into the house. If we do have an infection show up, if it's early and we can catch it and the spinach is big enough, we'll cut it, pull out a bunch of the plants, incorporate the residue, and then tarp it to try to isolate it if it's just a bed. And we've also flamed that sometimes to try to kill those plants a little more. But we also really try to isolate it and make sure that we don't move it to another house. Cladosporium is our other spinach problem. That starts to show up kind of now for us. We don't typically see it until we get into the late winter, early spring. Again, humidity management is really key, keeping the houses well vented, watering at sort of during sunny windows. It seems to help to keep it cooler. So once we get into a period where we can open those roll-up sides, that helps a bunch. Crop rotation is a problem because it survives for long periods of time on dead tissue. And we haven't found that there's a lot of genetic resistance. Mostly it is not advertised on, since we're also looking for the downy mildew resistance, there aren't varieties out there that are really cross resistant in any substantial way. Again, with Cladosporium, because of our winter market being a CSA, if there's like one spot or two spots and they're kind of small on some of the leaves or they're on a few of the leaves, we can often go ahead and use that. So we try to harvest enough ahead if we can, if the stuff is of size, and then go ahead and incorporate and avoid spreading it between the houses. Baby lettuce, we grow a fair amount of baby lettuce, sort of the opposite of the spinach, is always on the interiors of the houses, and transplanted in October. We hoop and row cover this stuff when the temperature gets below kind of the low 20s. You can see our hoops, the row covers ready for action there. lettuce crown rot is the major disease problem that we have in our baby lettuce. It's a compilation of organisms. Rhizoctonia and Botrytis, I think, are the main two. Rhizoctonia is the same thing, that you have butt rot in the fall. We found that timing of planting is really critical. We used to start baby lettuce in September, or to start transplanting in September into our tunnels. And we ended up with a scenario where it was warm enough in the tunnels, and we still see this when we have a really warm fall, that Rhizoctonia, which likes the warmer conditions a little bit, really got a head start. And our crown rot was worse in those falls when we had more growth during warmer conditions. So pushing our seeding dates back a little bit has helped us with the crown rot. We've also noticed if you get the plants a little too deep, just like in the field, it makes a big difference. And getting the soil nice and firm so that you can control that depth of planting has been really key for us. Water and row cover management are important too. So we like to get those plants breathing when we can get the row covers off of them. And we haven't seen a big difference in genetics. There are some mild differences among the varieties that we grow, which are all the Salanovas and the Easy Leafs, but we haven't seen a ton of that. A lot of times, and I guess the other factor in crown rot too is mechanical damage of the stem. So when you have a winter where it's pretty cold and the stems are freezing and thawing a lot, then you have a situation where you may be inviting more disease down the road, because those are entry points for the pathogens later on. So this year we did have more freezing and thawing. It was a colder winter. We're starting to see more crown rot now. And we'll typically, sometimes you can get away even when the plant is the stem is dying, you could still harvest the leaves. And then we'll just clean up those sections. A lot of times, like the picture in the lower right, you'll have a patch that goes, and in many cases, we'll just pull out those patches and then seed something else in after them as a replacement, arugula or radishes or something quick. Uncommonly, we really don't have trouble with downy mildew, because basically all of those multi-cut lettuces, the Salanovas and the Easy Leaf, have a really wide range of downy mildew resistances, so it pays to buy those. Occasionally we'll have powdery mildew issues, mostly on red varieties. Mostly we were seeing it on a red butter Salanova that we don't tend to grow in the winter anymore. But Millstop does a nice job cleaning that up if that's an issue. And it's potassium bicarbonate, which is sometimes used as a food additive. So it's one of those things where I don't feel too bad about spraying it and eating it. Tomatoes really were the two issues are leaf mold and powdery mildew. The genetic resistance is critical for us. So buying leaf mold resistance 1 through 5 fulvia is really basically every greenhouse tomato out there, with a few exceptions in the high loom categories, are leaf mold resistant. So that makes things easier. We spent a lot of time on humidity management between automated roll-ups, plastic mulch on the ground to keep it dry, regular pruning, lower leaf pruning, inner leaf pruning, keeping our tunnels tidy with airflow makes a big difference. And plant vigor, having really productive, healthy leaves makes a big difference. Powdery mildew, when we see it, it can be controlled by Millstop, aggressive pruning of infected leaves, removing plants if severe. Botrytis, we really only do preventatively and some cleanup when it's bad. Cucumbers, the mystery leaf spot that I'll let Christa talk about. Downy mildew is an issue. That's what's on the right there, the upper and lower. there's not really any prevention for that. Our only success has been aggressively feeding. If we see it early and can take out a couple of plants, but usually by the time we see it, the spores are throughout the house. So mostly fertigating, trying to keep those plants healthy. Powdery mildew, again, if we have it, successive sprays of Millstop can keep it at bay. Humidity control, like with the tomatoes, is really critical. Peppers, Phytophthora are a problem, keeping your soil not too wet, can't really rotate out of it. So that's what we're always watching for in peppers. And I just wanted to say thank you to the ICF team, who does a great job managing and keeping our tunnels growing and healthy, doing all the work day to day, all year round. And to Becky for this great webinar series and all the UVM extension folks helping out on that. And it's been great to work with you for decades. You're such a resource for all of us to get what we need to get. And thanks for Cornell allowing me to crib some photos of diseases off of their website.
Thanks, Andy. It's a lot of good management advice and tips and a lot of beautiful looking crops. You guys do an awesome job. So thank you for sharing your insights. I'm going to let Christa go, and there's some questions for you in the chat, Andy, that we can, if we have time to address with talking, we can, but some of them are kind of specific to the CSA and stuff. So if you want to take a crack at a few of those, that'd be great. While I hand it over to Christa, are you able to screen share?
Oh, I don't need to screen share.
Okay.
And sorry, I've had like one after another technological issue here, but I'm found a phone that I can hook up on. So
Oh no. Oh, thanks for persevering.
my Wi-Fi went. Yeah, just as Andy was talking. Yeah,
you're farming and presenting. It's amazing. Thank you.
So I don't have any imagery, but I've got lots of sort of key notes, because a lot of what Andy showed you is great. We do very similar production systems, and all those photos and such that you saw through his presentation are very similar to what happens at our farm. But I can certainly share a lot of little like tips and tricks and things that we've learned over the years of some of the problems that we're talking about today. And just to give you a rough idea, we do about almost 2 acres of hoop house production. Most of it's unheated, but we do have about 6 tunnels that we heat in the early season for tomato and cucumber early production. 4 of those have bottom heat, like ground heat, and the rest, a couple of them just air heat. A couple, starting with the greens, we do overwintered greens, as well as the main season we're growing tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, and zucchini in the houses. And our winter greens mix is similar to what Andy's doing. We do a lot of direct seeded baby greens, the spinach, baby arugula, mesclun, kales. We do, I saw one of the questions early on was about chickweed. We do steam our soils in the fall for where we're going to put in the baby greens so that we can get chickweed control through soil steaming. It's the most effective way we have found for that. You know, once you've got chickweed, it's hard to get rid of otherwise. If you can keep it out in the first place, congratulations. So then, you know, we do the only of those greens, the only ones we really overwinter for the whole winter are the spinach and the kale, and sometimes some pak choi or mustard greens. But spinach and kale are the primary ones. And then we start reseeding right about now for early spring greens to get a larger mix of greens back in there. That spinach picture that Ann showed with the yellowing spinach, it's pretty common. We see it in the spring. It is, in my opinion, we've noticed it mostly being a nutrient deficiency, often related to cold soils, particularly if you have poor drainage issues going on in those soils, because your spring melt off is pretty cold. Your water table might be higher because the ground might still be frozen. So you're getting a lot of inflow as the snow melts into your tunnels. So getting that perimeter drainage on the tunnels can often help keep your soils a little bit, better drained. which will keep them a little warmer and or allow them to warm up quicker in the spring and help with some of the nutrient availability in that way. But we also will often give a little boost of nitrogen in the spring to the spinach crops that we have overwintered. And yeah, that later, older growth is typically nutrient deficient, but if we give it a little boost in the spring early on, the new growth comes in really strong and green. It's key not to do too much. The only thing you can that we have found we can use that's fast acting enough is the Chilean nitrate, but it's pretty potent. So you have to be pretty careful with how much you put on. You don't want to burn your spinach and you don't want to put in excess. But that has helped to boost those overwintered spinach crops. So then a couple other things we've noticed in terms of one of the things that Andy stressed that we also stress here is ventilation. So prevention of the diseases for the tomato and cucumbers crops, well, and for the greens too, but particularly those big fruiting crops, the ventilation is key. We spend a lot of time and we've put a lot of resources into improving ventilation in our houses. We do have several that are automated with controllers. And if you get to that stage and are, willing to invest in that, if you're putting some pretty high value crops in there, and it's a big portion of your farm sales, it might be worth getting automated ventilation because it really does, you really can fine tune how well you take care of the crop in terms of the temperature and humidity control. It makes a big difference if that ventilation is happening at the correct times and the correct amount. And it's really hard to do manually especially if you have more than one tunnel you're managing, it's a lot of work to get those sides up or whatnot. We do have ridge vents on our biggest houses. And so if you're investing in a larger house, I would, and if you can afford the ridge vent as well, I would recommend doing it. It makes a big difference in terms of the ventilation capabilities of those larger houses. Especially if you're heating, if you're heating those houses too. We are pretty careful about our variety choices in terms of the disease resistance. And as Ann mentioned, I think that rootstock picture you had for corky root was probably ours. We had tried a new rootstock one year and found out it wasn't resistant to corky root and had some issues with plants early on developing that disease. They did grow out of it later as the soils were warmer and conditions were warmer, but they were stunted by that early on. So yeah, Maxifort has always worked well for us in terms of controlling corky root. And I would say, if you're new, starting early in tomato production in tunnels, you may not have seen it yet, but it will likely show up in your career if you're doing tomatoes in houses or tunnels year after year in the same locations. It's pretty hard to rotate away from it unless you're out of those houses for many years, but maybe Anne can speak more to that. She said it's, it's pretty much always there and it's exacerbated when the cooler, wetter times of year, but it's it's going to be there. So the grafting has helped a lot for that. Last year we got verticillium wilt in one of our houses, which we had never seen before. And so that particular house had cherry tomatoes in it, which were ungrafted. And so now any plants that are going into that house will be grafting again for protection against that. Like Andy mentioned, plastic mulch helps with humidity control as well as keeping moisture in the soil for the crop for tomatoes and cucumbers. And aggressive and regular pruning definitely makes a big difference. Let's see, other cucumber downy mildew. As Andy mentioned, it's a very hard one to control. The one method I've heard talked about a lot and I have not implemented yet, but is especially if you're holding cucumbers late in the season, is to try to get a way to heat from the bottom of your house. So, tubing at the bottom level of your house versus blowing hot air overhead. If you can heat low and get that heat coming up through the crop, in controlling your humidity that way, basically, and by pushing that overnight humidity out, So it's another investment in a heating system method, but it has, you know, several growers and some of the folks we were speaking with in Quebec last year were mentioning that as an effective way for combating downy mildew in cucumbers, or at least keeping it at bay. As Andy mentioned on fertigating for cucumbers, just to keep that nutrient level up, to keep them happy. I would say once we figured that out better and we're paying more attention to it, it definitely benefited our cucumber crop. We have started EC testing, electric conductivity testing of our soil solution weekly for fertigation purposes for our tomatoes and cucumber crops. We just started this last year to see if it would guide us better in how much to be fertigating versus just doing the recommended amount every week. And it was really interesting to watch how the crops changed over the season and definitely helped us. It's pretty simple. We use a HANA EC tester meter. And you take some soil samples and make a solution, and there's a dilution factor that you know is done a method for that, and there's target ranges that you're looking for each type of crop in terms of how much nutrients you want in the soil in a given week, you know, depending on where they are in their stage of production. So if that's something you're interested in, I can talk to people more about it, but it's and there's a lot of information online too if you look for it. But I found it really helpful. It didn't take much time to do the testing, and we just had one crew member that was trained up to do it, and they did it every week. And I definitely felt like our crops were healthier and we weren't over fertilizing, because in the past I had felt we had put too much on the cucumbers, but we weren't really sure, you know, how much to do because we didn't really know what was there. So that one was helpful. Looking through my notes, other little, I wanted to add to spinach one variety in addition to the ones that Andy had mentioned. Another one, it's not organic seed, but it does have the downy mildew resistance we're looking for, and it's a nice upright variety. It's a lizard. That's a variety we've used in the past few years in our mix. That's been nice. That probably covers most of the little tips and tricks. Powdery mildew, one other little hint. Powdery mildew in tomatoes. Rebelski is a variety that's completely resistant to it. And it's not like my favorite in terms of fruit production, but it's, you know, it's adequate, and it is 100% resistant. So if you do get a powdery mildew infection, it will be your backup for keeping some tomato production going. I had it growing in a house that had powdery mildew several years ago, and right next to Geronimo, and it was Geronimo had some resistance, but it wasn't 100%. But Rebelski, it was like untouched. It was pretty amazing. So that one's been tested, field tested by us. I didn't speak to the cucumber spot, the dreaded cucumber spot. So yeah, after all the testing that Anne has so graciously done for us, we also had some virus testing done by Vitalis, because we were testing some varieties for them, and they took some samples to see if there was a virus issue going on, and so we couldn't find anything that was explained from a disease perspective. So we have come down to it's an abiotic thing, and in speaking with Jacques of Climax Conseil up in Quebec, his suggestion was that it might be a phosphorus deficiency based on high pH, making the phosphorus less accessible. I've also noticed it to be more common in our wetter or cooler soils early on, which would also tie in possibly to a phosphorus holdup. So I'm guessing that it's that, and it's not that the phosphorus isn't in the soil, it's just not being accessible to the plants for various condition purposes or reasons. So more to be discovered as we figured that one out. But I don't know, Andy, maybe you can talk more to what you're seeing too on that one, but that's it hasn't ever really wiped out a crop, but it, probably has done some yield reduction especially if it shows up early. All right, there's my 10 cents.
I'd say that's worth more than 10 cents. Thanks, Krista. I just want to say that a lot of this high tunnel knowledge is generated by collaboration and sharing, which you and Andy and so many other growers have really contributed to this body of knowledge. So you guys are super generous to share. A couple questions in the chat. I'm assuming you probably can't see it from your phone very easily. Someone was asking about managing salt buildup in tunnel soils, and that doesn't have to be you, Krista, but anyone want to answer that one?
I can speak to it in terms of what we've done. So the tomatoes and cukes to a little bit lesser extent are pretty resilient to high salt levels. So as far as we know, it's not impacting them too much. But it is, we do see salt buildup, and typically where it's problematic is when we're germinating greens, baby greens. And then part of that's because, you've got a lot of soil surface, you got evaporation happening, the salts are getting drawn to the surface of the soil and getting concentrated up there. So when we have seeded, when we direct seed in the fall for our baby greens production, we are irrigating, really paying attention to that irrigation. We have overhead sprinklers, so we're irrigating the whole house to get that water pushing down through the soil profile and taking the salts down with it, and basically just diluting them out. So they're still there, they're still in the soil somewhere, but we're pushing them down away from the soil surface so that the seeds can germinate without that salt toxicity being there. And once they've germinated, when they're still pretty young, like a lot of times people will say, oh, I've got, damping off or whatever. And usually it's salt toxicity I have found to be happening, and it looks like damping off. But it's usually salt toxicity from, once they're up, maybe you're not irrigating quite as frequently, but you probably need to, if you're seeing that die off happen with the very young seedlings of your greens. Transplants are a little more resistant to it. Of course, they've got more root mass there already established. But if you're seeing that crusty white surface on your soils, just irrigating down through, I know Vern and Becky, you guys have had info on this too, of like a lot of water has to go down if you're really trying to push those salts down. So for the baby greens, we pay a lot of attention to it. And then for the bigger fruiting crops, we find if we're mixing our soils and, doing our pre-application fertilizer in the spring and getting everything mixed up, they usually do fine. We don't have to do any further mitigation for them. Of course, the prevention end of it is stop using, if possible, animal-based manure compost in your hoop houses. Those tends to be higher in salts than vegetation-based compost. And fertilizers as well from animal products tend to be higher in salts than your plant-derived fertilizers. So that's another option if you can shift away from those fertilizer sources.
Yeah, thanks, Krista. And just kind of logically too, like the reason why, or part of the reason why the germination is really impacted is it's very stratified. So it's that top like ½ inch of soil is like wicked high in salts, and then, less and less. So the transplant has more ability to withstand the impacts of high salt, and it's deeper in the soil. So another idea I've heard is to mix the soils as well. If you're opposed to tilling, but you have high salts, you might want to mix the soil or dilute it somehow just to get that level down on that top layer. I guess we have a couple minutes left. Anyone want to pipe up with a question? Someone was asking about where you get information for fertigation, and I'd say we're kind of making this up based on, like, we got some good information from Jacques at Climate Conseil and from other resources that we're kind of merging together information from hydroponics, but also like the soil type really, really matters. So lighter soils perform very differently than these heavier soils. So it's a little bit of a learning as we go experience with the fertigation.
Well, Becky, you might just add that if anyone needs those fertigation recs, they could reach out to you or me. I mean, we can share those.
Yeah, yes, thanks. We do have recommendations, and sometimes it's a matter of splitting apart, the total nutrient recommendations, and then kind of figuring out how you are learning that your crop takes it up. Like, Christa's learned like front loading it didn't really work out well, but it's still more or less the same total amount, just splitting it up over the course of the season. But yeah, happy to work with people on that. I'm gonna share this slide for our next couple webinars. Hopefully people can see that. Next week, we've got produce safety audits and traceability for wholesale markets with Hans and I think Rose Wilson again, who spoke last week. Really great information on wholesale markets. And then March 25th, we're back to talking about reduced tillage and have some great presentations on practices that help with that. So if anyone has any last...
Becky, there's another question in the chat from Andrew Geller. How to prune and trellis tomatoes and cucumbers? Are there different best practices for each in the greenhouse or tunnel spaces to maximize airflow and prevent disease?
Ooh, that's like the 2-minute challenge.
Yeah.
We should have another webinar.
I know. Quick, Christa, brain dump. No, I think like it's very specific to your systems, your setup. Kind of briefly, a lot of people are doing tomatoes, indeterminate tomatoes, single or double leader, pruning off suckers and pruning off lower leaves, as Andy and Christa both showed images of that. Cucumbers, there's a couple different systems that people are using. But with those greenhouse varieties, it's fairly similar to tomatoes in terms of like you're really choosing a leader and pruning off the vegetative growth to promote fruit. But I can send more resources on that if you want, Andrew. Maybe pop your email in the chat. Yeah, Andy says always worth trying anything in small numbers. We've been happiest with our Cukes 15-inch single leader, single row 1 liter, 5 foot between rows. And I know that like Andy and the ICF crew have been using the Clipper, the KLIPR for cucumbers, and I really like that as well. That's what I've kind of switched over to. So it's a nice way to kind of lower and lean cucumbers because they're growing so fast. Yeah, thanks, Andrew. I see your email. You can be in touch. But thank you, Anne, Christa, Andy, so much for your information and sharing and willingness to be here during lunch. And we'll see you all next week, hopefully. And the recording will be posted. So thanks a lot, everyone.
Thanks, Becky.
Thank you.